Welcome to the podcast where mental health is at the core of what we focus on. We strive to develop people like you to maximize who you are and what you've been called to do by sharing tools and resources for better brain health. And now here's your host, Juan Garcia.
Welcome to the podcast where we focus on mental health and peak performance. And in this series, we've been talking about untangling relationships. And today's episode, we are going to focus on lack of objectivity. That's one of the things that affects someone who is suffering from codependency and brings that into any type of relationship because of how we're wired. And the last episode, we spoke about codependency, how it shows up, why it shows up, and it is connected strictly to families that are dysfunctional and the children that grow up in dysfunction. And it's a way of coping, it's a way of life. Sometimes a person that's codependent doesn't even know that they're codependent, but it does show up. And now they're in relationships where there's a lot of issues, there's a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of abuse, verbal, physical, and even sexual abuse. Even in marriages, we're seeing time and time again how codependency shows up in relationships. And I decided to make this series and this podcast so that we can bring awareness. And if you think you can identify with some of the things that we talk about, please seek out help. We need to get the people help if they are struggling with relationships that stem from some of these codependent issues. And as I said, we're going to focus on lack of objectivity, because one of the issues with codependency is that it gives us this blur when it comes to seeing things objectively for ourselves. Now, a lot of codependent people or people that struggle with some codependency traits, they are good at seeing very objectively when it comes to other people. They can see how Susie and Norman and Charlie just have it all messed up. But when it comes to their own life, for some reason, there's a lack of objectivity. And so in this episode, I want to show you some of the things that define what lack of objectivity is, and also some of the defense mechanisms that are a very typical way of someone that's codependent, that lacks objectivity in a relationship that is becoming all tangled up. And we want to show you how to untangle that aspect of the relationship. So Helen is a 38-year-old married woman who has 2 young children, and her parents come over and they visit, and mom or grandma is very critical of the boys. Grandma is showing how naturally she just picks out all of the negative things that the boys do. And Helen is frustrated because Helen doesn't want her mom to be critical of the boys. They're young, they're learning, they're growing, they're good kids, they're great in school. They just have some little bad habits, but not a big deal the way grandma is making them. And so Barry is Helen's friend, and Helen is telling Barry, I just don't like when my mom comes and complains and criticizes my boys. And Barry is saying, well, why do you think she does that? I don't know, but she's always been like that. She did it with me growing up. Oh, really? Barry tells her. What did that look like? Did she do it a lot? Well, not really. Well, maybe. And what would she criticize? Oh, she criticized the clothes that I wore. She criticized the friends that I chose. She criticized the homework that I handed in. She criticized how I cleaned up. So Barry says basically everything. Well, I guess, but she's a great mom. She loves me. I know she loves me. And what about Dad? How was Dad reacting to all of this? Barry asked Helen. And Helen says, well, Dad would just grab a newspaper, go into the living room, and just read his paper. And that was his way of dealing with Mom, because he knew that Mom was just like that, because she would also criticize dad. And instead of fighting and arguing with her, he would just go and read his paper. So Barry was very curious to know whether or not Helen actually thought this was okay. And so they kept having conversations, but basically Barry made Helen think. And then a few days later, they got together again at work because they're co-workers. And as you know, as you're passing by or seeing each other within cubicles or passing through an office, Barry sees Helen again, and Barry says, "Hey Helen, how are you doing?" "Oh, I'm okay, Barry. We're talking about your mom." And so, by the way, Helen and Barry have known each other since middle school. So they're good friends, very healthy relationship that's mainly a working relationship. And that's why Helen felt comfortable sharing with Barry. Now, here's the story. Helen does not realize that her mom's criticism created some codependency in the family dynamics. And the way Helen's father dealt with the criticism was to ignore or to avoid. And Helen saw that as her mom's way of loving her by noticing things about her. But now that her mom is doing this to the kids, it's really annoying her to the point where she spoke up about it. Now, Helen has not talked to her mom about it yet, but she is sharing it with those close to her. And the reality is that it's an issue because this is what happens in relationships when there is codependency. We grow up with these issues from a dysfunctional home. We become adults, we live our lives, but we live with these codependency traits, and now they begin to affect our lives because we lack objectivity. Now, here are 3 different defense mechanisms that people like Helen struggle with as it relates to a lack of objectivity from the codependency. And the first one is a one-way perception. This is when you have the ability to see the greatness, the strengths, the good things of others, but for some reason you have difficulty seeing it in yourself. You pinpoint out people's attire, their quality of work, their quality of parenting, and for some reason when people point it out in you, or in this case Helen, you struggle with just accepting it and receiving it, and you don't see it. "Oh, I don't see it. I try, but I just don't see it. And the connection specifically with the case of Helen is that she just can't see it because she was always criticized. And it's connected to the fact that Helen probably believes in her deepest part of her soul that she's not good enough. And she is never going to be good enough for her mom. And part of the motivation that drives Helen to do the things that she does is guilt. She feels guilty. And because she feels guilty, now everything that she does is performance-based, even though she still cannot see the qualities that she has that are good, that are strong, and that are great. She lacks objectivity, and this will be an issue in relating to her boys if she does not get the help she needs to see it for what it is and be able to speak to her mom with grace and love so that she can have a healthy perspective of herself, of her mom, and of future relationships. And when I say relationships, I'm not just speaking of romantic relationships, although that's the majority of what we see. I am also including familial relationships, parent to child, child to parent, siblings, cousins, extended family, in-laws, etc. People that you are in relationship with. And this also includes yourself, because before you can establish any type of relationship, you must have a healthy relationship with yourself, and then secondly, with your creator, with your Heavenly Father, God. Which is why this topic is so important, because if you are a Christian, a person of faith in Jesus Christ, and you follow Jesus in all his ways, then you will struggle with your perception of God if you don't deal with the lack of objectivity that perhaps you have because of some codependency traits that you grew up having. I hope that makes sense so far. Now, here's defense mechanism number 2 for someone that lacks objectivity, and that is emotional walls. When someone lacks objectivity, they create walls and they don't want to express their emotions because they don't feel that it will be heard, it will be criticized, it will be judged, and therefore they rather not share it because it's a risk. It's a risk to experience pain, rejection, and a big word that I hear lately, and at least in my practice, is minimization, or dismissiveness. When someone you care about is hearing your heart and hearing your emotional pain, and their response minimizes or dismisses the essence of what you're sharing. For example, I say to someone that I'm in a relationship with, I say, man, when you said that, it really hurt me because I felt like I didn't really show you that I cared, and I do, and so I don't want you to feel that I don't care. And the person says, "Oh, you're always making a big deal about things. Don't worry about it. It's squashed. It's already done." So the intent of the person may be to make you feel better so that you're not down and out, but the wording gives it a feeling of dismissiveness or minimization, and not really giving credit to what the emotion that you're sharing, you're feeling and you're experiencing. So emotional walls are ways to protect ourselves when we lack objectivity, because we don't think that we have what it takes to get that person that we are convening with, having a conversation with, situational, whatever the situation is. We don't feel that we're going to be good enough, and then that makes us feel guilty, and so therefore we just build the emotional walls. And thirdly, the third defensive mechanism that a person that lacks objectivity uses in order to protect themselves is extreme or exaggeration. And what this looks like is we see individuals that have this type of mindset as thinking black or white. Either life is wonderful or life is awful. There is no gray area, and there is definitely no color. And a person that thinks in black and white suffers from what we call in therapy cognitive distortions, which I did a series on before on this podcast. So please make sure that you're identifying if you potentially or someone you know is struggling with black and white thinking, because this is a cognitive distortion. And a cognitive distortion, if you haven't seen any of the episodes regarding that theme or that series, a cognitive distortion is an irrational thought. And irrational thoughts drive our behavior because they get processed through our emotions. Things are bad, and so we feel bad. And therefore, if we feel bad, we give it meaning, and we believe that that's true, that the world is bad, and that there are evil people in this world, which is true, but that evil people are the ones that always kind of succeed or get away with things, and that becomes truth. And if that becomes truth, then every behavior, every decision I make is filtered or contextualized with that truth that I am believing. And so now black and white thinking becomes a problem because it is not rational. So these defense mechanisms, when they show up, they drive and they become the motivator of a lot of the decision making and behaviors that people take upon. So we have Helen, who is a hard worker, good mom, good wife, has everything going for her, but these types of defenses that she puts up because of lack of objectivity, can potentially slow her down and even cause her to suffer from depression, because the guilt will continually be the motivator driving her decision making, and it will never be good enough to please her mom, and she will never feel good about herself. And remember that success, the things that you can accomplish in life, fulfillment, joy, happiness, these are all things that are considered an inside job. They cannot depend on someone, something, or some place. Those things can change. They have to come within. And if you are a follower of Jesus, that within is actually the person of Jesus Christ that kind of reminds us every day who we are and why he created us. So these are the things that we can experience if we lack objectivity due to codependency and relationships that become tangled up. So now the question is, how do we untangle this aspect of lack of objectivity? The main thing that can be done to help Helen, in this case, reverse the lack of objectivity and give her a sense of objectivity is to make a list of good things that can be done in this world. Things like gentleness, kindness, love, physical things like hugging and kissing and embracing and encouragement, sensitivity, all these things. Make a list and then identify how often or to what scale. For example, always, very often, often, never, seldom, that kind of scale. Have Helen go through these things and check off which ones apply to her memory with her mom. And this will force her to focus on a scale or a grid that will show her the truth about these things that she either experienced or did not experience, or if she did, it was not enough to give her objectivity. And as she does that, then she can now incorporate what I do in my practice, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, and get her to identify some of these cognitive distortions, irrational thoughts, and put them on trial, meaning ask herself, is it true that she is not good enough? Is it true that she could never be good enough? Is it true that she has black and white thinking? And how rational is it? And if it's not healthy, now we have to remove that thought process and replace it with objective and absolute truth. And the cycle has to be practiced in order for Helen to be objective. Now, this is just an episode. Things are being said quickly, and it is not something that happens quickly, but I wanted to give you an idea as to how it can work if you or someone you know lacks objectivity due to some of these issues in relationships. And if you need help, obviously we're here to support you and help you and give you the services you need. But please, please, please make sure you seek help from a professional that can help you with this process. Now, stay tuned. If you have not subscribed, please do so. Click on the notification bell so that you're notified when these episodes drop, and you will obviously be part of the Mind Yours family, as I am trying to show you tips, tools, and give you resources so that we do not fall into these codependent traits and have untangled relationships. That's all for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one.
Thank you for tuning into our podcast. For more information, visit our website at juangarciaenterprises.com. Our host, Juan Garcia, is available for speaking, coaching, and one-on-one counseling. You can email us at info@juangarciaenterprises.com. Until next time, remember, we only have one mind, so mind yours.